Dear English literature learners, I'd like to give you some idea on questions and answers on English literature, Middle English period, 1066 to 1350, Part B. This video is confined to short questions with answers on the Middle English period. My next video will be on broad questions and answers on the early English period, 450 to 1066, Part C. Middle English period, 1066 to 1350. Question number 14. Write a short note on Middle English romances. Or what do you know about Arthurian legend of Middle Age? Answer. There were a great number of romances in this period, and they can be classified according to their subject, but all of them are alliterative and rhyming in matter. The romances dealing with English history and heroes are numerous. Of these, Kinghorn and Havelock, the Dane, Guy of Warwick, and Bevis Hampton are some of the most popular romances. This group is known as Matter of England. There were some romances connected with Sir Arthur, Arthur and Merlin, Sir Gawain and Green Knight, etc. are the finest examples of Middle English romances. Among the romances, the Matter of Rome is great and large in number with classical theme, such as the exploit of Alexander the Great is also like the destruction of Troy. There are some romances dealing with clergymen. For example, Rolfe Quelcher is a popular romance. Another is Sir Frambrace. This group is sometimes called the Matter of French. There is also a class of miscellaneous romances on various theme and quality. For example, Amice and Amilon is a touching love story. William of Pellerne is another familiar story about missing here theme. Floris and Blocheffler tells the love of a knight song. Tells the love of a king's son for a maid. It would take volume to comment upon the romances. There were variety in theme and style in romances, but in general, we may say that the prevailing subject is of a marital and amatory nature. Use of supernatural was the additional interest of romances. It freely entered into the story. Question 15. Write a short note on Middle English religious poetry. Answer. The Ormulum was written by Orm, 12th century. The dialect is not East Midland. It consists of a large number of homilies addressed to fellow canon regular Walter. This book is called Ormulum or Ormulum because Orm wrote it. The Owl and the Nightingale, authorship of which is still unknown. Probably it was written in the early part of 13th century. It consists of a long argument between the nightingale, representing the joys of life, and the owl stands for wisdom and sobriety. It is one of the loveliest poems of its kind. Orison to our lad, Genesis and Exodus, the Bestiary, the Moral Ode, the Proverbs of Alfred are some of the religious and didactic poems during first half of the 13th century. The Cursor Mundi was composed in the first quarter of 14th century. It was a religious work dealing with Old and New Testament stories. Richard Rolle was one of the familiar literary figures. He was born in Yorkshire and was educated at Oxford and later became a hermit. His Prick of Conscience is a significant work. He wrote various prose pieces. His important work was the long poem Richard Rolle of Hampole. Apart from these various kinds of poetry, there were some alliterative poems. There were 4 remarkable poems written in West Midland dialect: Pearl, Purity, Passion, and Sir Gawain and Green Knight. The first 3 poems are religious in theme. Pearl tells of a vision that the poet seeks Pearl, which he led asleep into the grass. In his vision, he sees his pearl appears to be the vision of a dead Magian, and he obtains a glimpse of New Jerusalem. This poem contains a long discussion between the poet and the pearl. Purity and patience are more didactic in theme. They are spirited and realistic. However, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is the finest of all Middle English romances for its mastery of plot handling, its realism, characterization, descriptive power, etc. Question 16. Point out the characteristics of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Answer. The most interesting of all Arthurian romances are the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The material is taken from French, but the English craftsmanship is evident. A gigantic knight in green entered the banquet hall of Arthur and his knights and challenged, and with one blow sends the giant's head rolling through the hall. The Green Knight picks up his head and mounts the horse and goes with the words that he would return the blow on next New Year's Day. At last, Gawain returns to Arthur's court and tells the whole story. After that, the Knights of the Round Table wears a green girdle in his honor. The poem is remarkable for its liveliness and variety of scene. It shows chivalry and courtesy and is different from Anglo-Saxon poem. The characteristics of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is enumerated by Arthur Compton Rickett. There, number 1, it is an epic combined with lyrical elements. Number 2, the romance shows courtly life and the change of lover, therefore it has a historical value. It is remarkable for the display of tender love and charming display of sin. Number 4, it displays knowledge of medieval craftsmanship and art. Number 5, it shows literary power of native story. Question 17. Write a short note on handwriting and printing during the Norman period. Answer. Medieval writing was done by hand. For the scribes, the period began and ended with the unwelcomed arrival of conquerors, Normans, in 1066 and the printing press in 1476. The record shows that it was some generation before native literature recorded. Historians of England agree that a period ends with the 15th century, when the first printed English book appeared in 1476. The phase of Middle English was virtually over, and the language assumed a modern form, except the spelling. Afterwards, the War of Roses took place between Lancastrian and Yorkists to claim the throne, but the struggle ended in victory of Lancastrian. Henry Tudor, in 1485, made a political marriage with Elizabeth of York. They called this first son by British name of Arthur. In 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella drove Muslims out of Spain. In 1503, their daughter Catherine, who are married to Arthur, became Henry VIII. Henry divorced her in 1533, leading to the break with Rome and a separate English nation-state with central rule and a state church was established. As printing and Protestantism established, the vernacular manuscripts, those survived, were neglected. For example, some of Chaucer's works have been lost, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight was not printed until 1839. Literature survived in three languages: Latin, Norman, French, and English. English writing was local, but the English which survived was Frenchified in language and culture. Avoiding these complexities, a brief history of English literature focuses on modern and do not look back. In the Middle Age, English language developed in nature and structure. The works of Julian of Norwich and Sir Thomas Malory in the 15th century and Chaucer in 14th century have been influenced by the works of Middle Ages. Question 18. Discuss the impact of French in Middle English period. Answer. Historically, the English Middle Ages is the period between 500 to 1500. But the period after 1100 is often called the later Middle Ages. In English political history, this runs from 1066 to 1485. In European cultural history, 13th century is regarded as the High Middle Ages. Therefore, we can call 12th century as the spring of Middle Age, 13th as the summer, 14th as autumn, and 15th as winter. However, the conquest of England in 1066 by William of Normandy displaced English as the medium of literature because the language of new ruler was French. William the Conqueror tried to learn English but gave up. The section who dealt with him had to learn French, and French was the language of court and law for 3 centuries. The Normans spoke the Norman French. The Norman French of England was called Anglo-Norman. Almost all bishops were French. Literature in English suffered disruption in 1066. Classical Old English verse died out and prose continued. Sermons were written in English. English assumed a different form from new writing. In other words, with the impact of French, English language revived in a different form. Question 19. Discuss the use of dialect and change of language in the Middle English period. Answer. There appeared a change of dialect and language in Middle Age. There were no standard literary English, even when English attained priority in French in the reign of Richard II. Great writers like Chaucer and Langland and the writers of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight wrote in different forms in English. Chaucer wrote in London English, Langland wrote Worcestershire, Gawain composes in Staffordshire English. William the Conqueror made London capital of England. London English itself is a mixture of dialect. English opened in English instead of French in 1362. And in the 15th century, London changing English became the national standard. Printing was introduced in 1476, which helped the spread of literary excellence. The King's English was introduced in prayer books and in the authorized version of Bible. The Middle English dialect presents variation in vocabulary and grammar. The absence of a standard spelling makes Middle English dialect different. The conquest aided thousands of French words of Middle English. In other words, Old English turned to Middle English. The Old English syntax subject plus verb plus object became subject plus object plus verb. There was a reduction of inflection. Number 20. Write a short note on Old English ballads. In Anglo-Norman period, the literature was a copy of the French and was intended only for the upper classes. Here and there were singers who made ballads for common people. On account of its obscure origin and its transmission, the ballads is always the most difficult of literary subjects. Ballads were produced continually in England from Anglo-Saxon times until the 17th century. That for centuries, there were the only popular literature that common people could understand and easily read. For instance, the ballads of the Merry Greenwood Men, which gradually connected unto the jest of Robin Hood. One will understand better, perhaps, than from reading many histories of what the common people of England felt and thought while their lords and masters were busy with impossible metrical romances. These ballads speak the heart of the English folk. There is lawlessness, but this seems justified by the oppression of the times and by the barbarous severity of the game laws. An intense hatred of shams and injustice lurks in every song, but the hatred is saved from bitterness by the humor with which captives, especially rich churchmen, are solemnly lectured by the bandits, while the square at a rite of torture prepared before their eyes in order to make them give up their golden purses. And the scene generally ends in a bit of wild horseplay. All literature is but a dream expressed, and the Robin Hood is the dream of an ignorant and oppressed but essentially noble people, struggling and determined to be free. Thank you for watching. I'm Shamim Sarwar. My next video is on the broad questions and answers on early English period, Part C. Have a nice day.